I want you to imagine something for me. Wherever you are, wherever you're listening this, however you're listening this, for just a short second, I want you to close your eyes and imagine something for me. Just close your eyes and imagine yourself, your own body, your own skin, your eyes, your hair, your own face. And then imagine someone you love deeply, truly, intensely. Their skin, their flesh, their body, their things. Imagine their things. The things that remind you of them, the things that you remember them by, the things they like, the things they hate, the things that you associate with them. Imagine the person you love and their things, and you. And then I want you to imagine that person gone, vanishing, slowly in front of your eyes, walking away at the end of the road. And around you, wherever you're standing, are the things that they left behind. Things they loved, things they didn't, but things that were theirs. Open your eyes. Breathe in your reality. Picture yourself wherever you are and hold things around you. That, my beautiful listeners, is the essence of the book that we are going to be discussing today, Cobalt Blue by Sachin Kundalkar. Hello, everyone, and welcome back to Shelf Life, a podcast where we discuss books, their philosophies, but most importantly, our personal relationship with a book. And like I had mentioned in episode 2, we are back with a book that is my personal favorite, that I am honestly very, very excited about. We are going to be discussing a book that was written in 2006 but re-released in 2013 by a different author because it was a translated version, and this is a book that means a lot to me, and we are going to be discussing it here on this podcast in relation because of Pride Month. It is a book that celebrates not just heterosexual love but also homosexual love. And we at Shelf Life are huge, what is the word for it? Stanners, I guess. We stan the community, and we wanted to do an episode which was dedicated just to Pride Month, and we felt that this book perfectly encapsulated that, and I personally really wanted to talk about this book. So this is a win-win for me and for you. Now, I realize that a lot of you, and I mean a lot of you, might have never even heard of this book, might have never seen it on the shelves. You must have never come across it, and I totally understand that. I myself came across it in a very strange way, in a very weird, unusual way. I just heard it once in a podcast that I was listening to about books again, and it was the first time I was listening to something like that, and it just came up. It was a podcast dedicated to LGBT literature, and it was at a time when I really, really wanted to read more LGBT literature in my life. I've read a few books about the community that related to the community or had characters from the community, but not too many. And I feel at blame for that. I feel at fault for not having read enough LGBT literature. As someone who is from the community, as someone who believes that love is love, I truly wanted to read more. And this book came through that search, through that journey of finding more LGBT literature. And I just want to start off by saying that if you are someone who is looking for more LGBT literature by any chance, will be suggesting quite a few books throughout this podcast, and you can pick those up. These are books that primarily focused on the lives of gay men. So if you are someone who's looking for something even beyond that, and if you have read something beyond that, send it across. Tell me in the comments, or you can even personally message me. I don't mind. I'm always up for discussion about books. So let's go back to the beginning. Let me talk to you a little bit about why I started the podcast the way that I did. And honestly, it was just to give you a little glimpse of what I feel about the book and how I think the book wanted to be perceived or wished to be looked at. I think when I read the book, this is exactly how I felt. Those few short seconds that you went through, especially because that was a time in my life when I was going through something very similar to what happens in the book. I think I've related a lot more than I would have ever dreamed of. And that happens a lot, right? I mean, if you're a reader, you would know. When you read something and when it very directly connects with your life, it can be quite scary. It can be quite scary when you understand a character better than the other characters in the book. And for me, that happens a lot. And that is something that really scares me sometimes. I start thinking, should I really be doing this, or should I should I not be doing this? Am I gonna get, am I gonna die in the climax? Is my character gonna die in the climax, or something like that? So I think about that a lot. And the reason why I wanted to start the podcast in that way was also to tell you that in this episode, I wanted to do something a little bit different. I didn't want to follow the convention that we've followed for the other two episodes. I didn't want to follow the structure that we've established here. And this episode specifically is going to be quite structureless and quite random. And I'm just going to be, rattling things off at the top of my head. In fact, I haven't even made proper notes here. And I just wanted to talk to you about something that is very close to my heart. And to tell you just how much this novel means to me would be absolutely impossible. This story has been woven into me in a way, into my very soul, and in my life, I truly will never be able to let it go. And it's one of those novels that really, really stay with you. And the truth is that I understand that it is not the greatest novel in the world with respect to, I don't know, maybe the technical aspect of it. It's not like it was, it's 100,000 pages long or nothing of that sort. But it's just, it's not like it has many layers to it that you can spend years and years in uncovering and unfolding. And it's got, all these metaphors and all that. It's not really all that complicated. It's quite a simple novel. In fact, it's so small that you might even finish it in one sitting if you're ambitious enough. But I think that sometimes you connect to certain novels for reasons you don't know and you don't understand. Sometimes some things mean to us more than we can assign them a reason why. That happens to me with a lot of art, you know. Sometimes I find myself attracted to a lot of mediocre art and feel that it means a lot to me, and I honestly don't understand why. And that's where we come back to, even the theme of our podcast, which is anecdotes, which is personal stories. We relate books to our personal lives, and that is why we get attracted to even mediocre art or art that is not, brilliant in its technique or too complicated with metaphors or literature jargon. We get attracted to anything and everything because in some way it is related to our own selves and our own lives. So that's why I wanted to talk about this book, even though a lot of you might not know about it, a lot of you might not have heard it, but I urge you all to pick it up, and I hope that through this episode I can convince you to pick up this novel. So let me tell you about the book. Um, it's a book that was published in originally in Marathi. It is written by a man named Sachin Kundalkar, and it was published in 2006, but also re-released in English, in the English translated version of it in 2013, and it was translated by Jerry Pinto, who you might be knowing as the man who wrote Murder in Mahim, if you've read it. And this book, if I was to explain in very concise sentences what the plot was, what the premise of the book was, it's a book where two siblings fall in love with the same man, who comes to stay in their house as a paying guest. And they both fall in love with the same man, and these are two siblings who are male and female. And the story is told through their perspective. So, one half of the novel is completely Tane, who is the male sibling, his perspective and his narrative. And the second half of the novel is completely Anuja, who is the female sibling, her narrative. The first part of the novel, Tane's narrative, is told to us in the form of a letter almost that he's writing to this man. This paying guest, by the way, is completely unknown to us as readers. He is not named throughout the book. We don't know much about him. Whatever we know of him, we know through these two siblings and their memories of him and the impact that he has left on them. And in the beginning of the book itself, it is established that this man is not in their house anymore. He has left them. He has left the siblings. He's disappeared. And so the first part of the book, which is Tanai's narrative, is almost written like a letter addressed directly to this man. It's almost as if he's talking to him. And, there are a lot of memories that he shares, a lot of personal things, and he talks about himself and the relationship they had. And that's where the book really explores a very beautiful side of homosexual love. And the second part of the novel, which is Anuja's part, is written in the form of diary entries. So Anuja is actually writing in a diary, and we are reading that diary. And we understand her perspective, and that's where the heterosexual love of the novel comes in. And these are both stories that have a similar feel to it. but they're at the very same time very, very different. They are miles apart, and they have, you know, layers to them that you will be moved and that will touch you, and it's completely impossible that it won't. So I want to tell you my strongest memory of the book, because this is something that we've started on this podcast, something that we keep coming back to. So I want to tell you my strongest memory of this book. It travels back to, I think, September of 2018, which was when I picked up this book. And I actually remember it very clearly. I was again on a train. Most of my book memories go back to train rides, because I do spend a lot of my time on trains because of college or anything else that I'm doing. So this book and I go back to a train ride as well. But it was a little different that day. It was raining quite heavily, but it had, slowed down by that time. It was afternoon, which is not a time that I usually travel. I usually travel in the mornings, but that day I was traveling in the afternoon. It was quite cloudy and gray. Everything around was quite dim, and I remember I was sitting in my booth alone. There were only a few other women in that compartment at that time, and it was very quiet, which is very, very um, different in atmosphere when it comes to Mumbai locals. If you've ever traveled, if you live here. And I'm as I'm reciting this, a lot of, things are coming back to me, and I remember very strongly uh, just the little things. So I remember the drops of rain sprinkled at my bare feet that I'd kept up, propped up against the seat in front of me. And I remember that it was very, very cold, and that the train was moving unusually fast, and there was a lot of cold breeze that came in, that raced inside the train, raced against my ears. The rattle of the train tuned down to just a whisper as I read the opening lines of the book. That you should not be here when something we've both wanted happens is no new thing for me. Today, too, as always, you're not here. So that is the opening of Cobalt Blue. And it is Tanay's narrative. And when I read it, there was something that told me instantly that I was going to be hooked. That this was not going to be just a regular book. It was going to be something that was going to stay with me for a while. And this is why I'm saying that this episode might get a little too emotional, might not follow the structure that we've already established, but that's the beauty of it, that we can make our own structure, we can make our own rules, and this is a podcast where we can be completely free with how we feel about books and how we feel about stories. So, like I said, the premise of the story is quite simple. It's just a story about two siblings who fall in love with the same man, and that man leaves them. So I think when you say that this is a love story, I would disagree. It's more of a story about um, leaving and how to learn the ways of a goodbye, the shape and sound of a goodbye. And that's how I would describe the book. Whenever someone asks me, what do you think this book, how do you describe this book? That's usually what I tell them. It's a book that teaches you the shape and sound of a goodbye. And the theme of nostalgia, as you might have noticed, is quite strong throughout the book. The book is narrated through memories, right? And it celebrates the beauty and the pain that comes with having memories and keeping memories. Um, and it celebrates that the act of nostalgia, the act of remembering, and also at the same time trying to forget. So that I feel is extremely evident throughout the book. And my personal memory of this book also relates to something quite similar. It relates to nostalgia, and like I said, rain is the first thing that um, I relate this book with. Reading it during monsoon, during much like a time like right now. This is June when we're recording this, and it's gonna start raining anytime soon. So it was quite a similar time, and I think emotionally also, I was at a place in my life where I think I could personally relate to Tanay and Anuja's characters. So I think I was just looking for a book where that I could build that relationship that could stay. And you usually do that. I think as readers, we do that. We try to look for books, we try to look for characters that we can build a relationship with. And sometimes it is to fill some kind of void that we have, but sometimes it is just because we are empathetic that way. And I think that is something that you should be proud of. If you're someone who reads a lot, be proud of that. Be proud of your empathy. Yeah, I think I should have framed it that way. It's a great coming of age story, whatever age you are. It's a great book that talks about the troubles of being young, the troubles of being young and gay in the world, or even just any bit different. I think it really, really discusses an important question of uh, the recklessness of emotion that you go through when you're young. It talks about the confused promiscuity of youth, even. And these are all concepts that I think you don't really find a lot in regional Indian novels. And I was so happy, so happy when I found this. It was truly like an eye opener for me, to find that such important concepts are being written about and being so beautifully presented, even in novels so obscure. Um, and so, I mean, I don't know what the word for it is, but obscure is what I wanted to convey. So I felt very happy when I read the book. And I think a little side note that I mentioned here is that if you are by any chance Maharashtrian, if you are, if you've lived in Maharashtra even, or Pune, I think you will specifically like this book a lot because it brings out a very, very rich Maharashtrian color that stretches onto every single page. And you have to give it up to the translator for this, Jerry Pinto, who retained a lot of Marathi words. There's a lot of specific Marathi context in the book that what I mean to say is that there's a lot of events in the book that is specific to the Maharashtrian community. And there are words that belong to the Maharashtrian community, of course. And Jerry Pinto did a very good job by retaining all of them. And I mean all of them. And he doesn't even, make a big deal about it. It's not like there are some writers who, you know what they do? They do a parenthesis and they will translate the word in English. And I feel that that is so disrespectful, honestly, to do that. Not every word needs to be translated in English. Not every word needs to be understood with an English tongue. So I think it was really, really wonderful that the translator didn't translate every single word and try to make it more uh, approachable to the audience, or easy to understand for the audience. Some words you just know the meaning of it, or you should just find out if you don't know. And if you didn't get the context, you should Google it out. You can do that these days. And there is a quote in the book that I want to tell you about. And I think it's a very beautiful succinct quote. Sorry, my bad. And I think it encapsulated a lot of emotions for me, and a lot of great, uh, just a great deal of feelings. It's a quote that goes, "It is my museum of broken things." It's just one line, but I don't know what it was about that line that really struck me. And when I think about this book, I think about it through this line that says, "It is my museum of broken things." And that's how the book is too. It has a very fragmented narrative, like I said. There are no sequences, there's no timeline. It is told completely through the intensity of memory. It is told through what you remember about a person. And it's interesting because the characters are broken, right? The characters who are narrating the story and whose perspective we are hearing are actually so broken, and so bruised, uh, in love, and they are grieving, and they are remembering while trying to forget. And I think that is a very beautiful emotion that most of us have gone through in our lives, or will go through at some point, maybe. It was something that I was personally going through when I read the book, when I picked up the book. This emotion, this action of trying to remember, uh, while also trying to forget, and just recording random memories of a person who perhaps meant a lot to you for a great deal of time. And when they vanish, you are left with so much of their things, so much of their memories, and so much of these little things that they leave behind. It could be their scent, it could be a bracelet, a dress, it could be their shoes, their hairband, it could be anything. And that becomes your museum of broken things, like the book says. It becomes your uh, imagination, your everything, and you hold it as close as you could have held that person. Um, and Going back to the technical aspect a little bit more, uh, I just wanted to tell you that, like I said, Tane's narrative, the boy's narrative, which comes first, is told through memory, is told through his memory. Uh, and there's a lot of, what I noticed is that there's a lot of longing, but not grief in his narrative. There are still traces of love in his mind, uh, which is why I felt that he narrates through memory and through the form of almost a direct address to this unnamed paying guest who he loved and whom he had a relationship. So I think for Tane, obviously there's the sting of rejection that he feels. There's betrayal as well. Um, but I think there's a lot more to do with betrayal than rejection. Like I said, I felt that through a lot of his narrative, he still talks about the way that the man looked, or um, there's a scene that he describes where this man is, just standing by the window, and he's come out of a bath. He's looking absolutely beautiful, almost like out of a painting. And he's just standing there watching outside the window, just wiping his hair. Uh, and he takes a picture of him standing there, um, just like that. And he remembers this moment and he holds it so close to him. Keeps going back to it throughout the book. So I think he definitely delves more into the beautiful aspects of the man. He remembers the tenderness, the hope, the desires. He remembers himself like he would in love. And I think when I said in the beginning of the podcast that this book is almost like it tells you the shape and sound of a goodbye. I think this is what I meant. That you go through an entire process of letting go and saying goodbye through this book. And step one of that process is obviously to remember the better aspects of a relationship or whatever it is that you shared with a person. You remember the more humane aspects, the lovelier parts, the tenderness, like I said. You remember the details, the the way that they smiled, the way that they smelled, the way that you laughed, the way that their skin shined, maybe. You remember the little things and you remember how beautiful they felt. And that's why your narrative will always be clouded by love and by longing rather than grief. You are grieving, mind you. You are definitely grieving and you are definitely in the process of letting go and moving on. But in the beginning, you are still trying to pick up the pieces of where you are and what is left. Like I said, you are, trying to build your museum of broken things. And that is Tanay's narrative. That is the homosexual part of the book. That is the part where you are given so much to remember. So many beautiful aspects are given in the book. And I think you would get a clear idea of what I say when I mean that his entire narrative is clouded by his longing and by his feeling of uh, need and lust and love for this man who comes in and just, shakes up his entire life. So that's Tanay's part of the book. In Anuja's narrative, there's so much more emphasis on the self and her own struggle, and the fact that in this process of grieving, you really focus more on yourself after a point as well. So Anuja's narrative, like I said, had more emphasis on her own struggle. There is grief not over what was lost, but over what remains, and the fact that what remains is quite um, full of emptiness. I realize what I've just said. I've said full of emptiness, but I think there's something that there's some kind of emotion that I hope has reached you. There is something that is lost, and but there is a lot that remains as well. And I think when you're in the process of grieving, you probably don't know what to do with what remains. You don't know how to navigate it and how to deal with it, what to make of it. Like I said, they're things, right? You don't know what to do with their things. with your memories. So that was Anuja's narrative, her dealing with the things. So that that was Anuja's part of the narrative. And I've noticed here, I've written it down, that it also gives a very, very strong and accurate description of what a depressed person goes through when they are going through a depressive episode. And it shows this real sense of quiet rage and anger that comes through that process. Um, and, you know, I think now that we have discussed both Tanay and Anuja's characters, you would also see the similarities. You would see that Tanay and Anuja represent two halves of the same man, of the same coin. You see the process of healing through them, and you see all the shades of grief through them. So it's really interesting the way that the book portrays that, presents that. Um, and I think if I have to connect it to another LGBT book that dealt with a lot of personal monologues and narratives, I would go back to a classic LGBT novel, which was a novel written by James Baldwin, Giovanni's Room. It's quite popular and it's a classic in LGBT literature, and it's really beautiful because it also goes through all the things that Tanay goes through in the book. Like I said, the promiscuity, the confusion, the recklessness, all of that combined and presented very, very beautifully. And I think something that I want you to think about is a question that I want to leave you with. Why do you think that the paying guest, the man that they both fall in love with, why is he not given a name? Why is he kept ambiguous in that sense? So that's something you should think about. And lastly, coming to our favorite part of the podcast, which is where we discuss our favorite question. Why do we think the story was told? Now, I think the story was told because I feel there's a little bit of magic in this book. I truly believe that. I believe that it is so personal and so human that it becomes magical. And, there's a quote by Martin Scorsese where he says that the most personal is the most creative. And I go by that. I stand with that. I think when we tell our own stories, we inspire so many people, and we have the ability to touch so many people. And I think I would like to believe that the story had something to do with Sachin Kundalkar's real life. I don't know if it did, but I think it did. I would like to believe that it did. And I think it also has a little bit of magic because the way that it came into my life, the way that I came upon the book, and the time that I encountered it was really, it had to be the universe sending me a sign. This book really helped me through a difficult time, and through a lot of, I think it led to a lot of self evaluation and growth, and that's always a good thing, right? And I think I learned a lot from the book. Like I said, the shape and sound of a goodbye, and most importantly, how to completely let go. In fact, a fun little anecdote, uh, when I finished the book, um, and like I said, the person that I was no longer going to have any contact with, that, whose life I was not going to be a part of, I actually gave my copy of this book to that person, because I I felt that I think this book had everything that I had been trying to say, and also it had everything about who I was going to be in my life later on, that person would not be a part of. So I think it led to a lot of self growth. Um, and that is why I do not have a copy of my favorite book. But that's okay. I think all's good that ends well. And as long as I remember this book and I remember the words, and I will never forget the words, that is all that matters. So I hope you like this episode. And if you have any other anecdotes related to this book, you can definitely send it in, because I have not met anyone who's read this book, and I would really like to meet someone who has. So if that's the case, send us your questions, and I will get back to you. If you have anything else that you want to discuss, send it to me, and we will discuss it on the podcast. Next week's book is also one of my absolute favorites. It is a book by Jumpaleri. It is a book that means a lot to me, and I think means a lot to a lot of Indian readers, especially children of immigrant families. It is the book The Namesake. Yes, a very popular book, and we will be discussing that at length. So if you've not read it, I suggest you go pick it up, you read it, and come back. Even if you've not read it, it's okay. You can just tune in and listen to us tell our stories. Thank you for listening, and I hope you like this episode. Now